Hello again, Biology 300 students. Mr. Parker here, and this is the Evolution Screencast number 3, and we are looking at evidence to support evolution. Okay, and you can see a couple different pictures here. We'll be talking about these a little bit later on as we get through this screencast. But definitely have your notes, a note-taking sheet out, so you can jot down some of the notes in any format that you'd like, and we'll go ahead and discuss some of the topics that kind of help support the idea of evolution. Okay, so first thing is that there's many different disciplines within the science area that help support the idea of evolution. Okay, as you can see here, I'll jot these down: biology, chemistry, physics, geology, and paleontology. I think you probably know most of what these all are. Okay, just kind of review. Geology just deals with studying the rocks and land formations, and paleontology is we're looking at studying the fossils and dinosaurs and items like that. Okay, so make sure you jot down these few different disciplines that help support ideas behind evolution. Okay, and then what we're going to be looking at to help support this idea of evolution is a few different items: the origin of life, geology, the fossil records, comparative embryology, comparative biochemistry, and then comparative anatomy. So this is kind of a layout of what we're going to discuss throughout this PowerPoint and screencast. Looking at these different items, and all of them will help support the idea of evolution and changing over time and how things are kind of interconnected. Okay, so the origin of life. This is basically kind of where we start, okay, where things begin, the evidence of evolution. Okay, the first one, we have the origin of the universe, and I think a lot of you have heard before of the Big Bang theory, and then and that's basically the beginning of the early Earth. And the Big Bang is just basically this mass collision occurring, and it helps create the atmosphere as we know it, going from like inorganic material to organic material, creating oxygen, amino acids, and different items, compounds that we need in order to sustain life. Okay, and then there's also the how evolution starts up is the chemical evolution, and as I mentioned, going from inorganic to organic molecules. Okay, so we have the Big Bang, and then the heterotroph hypothesis, where we inorganic, basically just organisms that are not living, where we have organic, that's carbon-based, and all living things are made up or have some carbon-based in it. Okay. So one of the famous, or a group of famous scientists, or two famous scientists that have went through many experiments to basically kind of look at the idea of how the Big Bang would create the atmosphere that we know it. And the group is Miller and Urey. Okay, and what they did here is you can see it following the system here. It says they studied molecules present at the time of early Earth. All right, so they looked at methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Okay, and what they did was they used this chamber. As you can see here, you can see the chamber that they're using here, and this is going to kind of show you what's occurring, what's happening through the little animation. But basically, what happened was he mixed molecules in the reaction chamber that he believed was present at the time, and then he sparked it with electricity to stimulate lightning, because there was a lot of lightning reactions happening at then. And then he exposed it to some UV radiation, okay, to simulate the cosmic rays coming in from the out of the atmosphere. And then what happened was, with the end result was that it produced basic amino acids in these organic molecules. So what you see up here, okay, these are the molecules that were present during early Earth, okay, in the beginning, before time, the atmosphere that we know it now. And by him simulating and doing this reaction that you can see here that occurred within this chamber, this is what his result was. He developed amino acids and organic molecules. Now, you guys know that from our previous chapters that amino acids are the building block of proteins, and proteins basically controls our body and tells our body what to do, when to do it. And then these organic molecules have to have carbon-based, so this is able to sustain life that we know it. Okay, so this is the Miller-Urey experiment, and they use these different molecules to prove or show how we went from having an atmosphere that couldn't sustain life to having an atmosphere that we could sustain life. All right, so first, let's take a look at biological evolution. RNA is an information molecule and catalyst. Okay, that's the first thing you should jot down, because RNA is a simpler molecule than DNA was, and it was used as information. And then there's something called the endosymbiotic theory. And as you can see here, mitochondria and chloroplasts were originally free-living prokaryotic cells. At one time, scientists have concluded that mitochondria, which we know now is the powerhouse of the cell, okay, and then you have chloroplast, which is also produces power through the process of photosynthesis. Where at one time they're separate organisms, and through the period of time, they've actually, obviously now we know, have combined to become within one cell. But the scientists at one time believed that they were free-living prokaryotic cells, and they actually both contain their own DNA and have their own genetic information. Okay, so this is kind of just showing you a little picture of that, how this happened. Here's your host cell. As you can see, you have some of your mitochondria moving into this host cell, and then you have a chloroplast moved into the cell. So originally, the chloroplast and mitochondria were by themselves during the end of the symbiotic theory, and then eventually they've become one within one cell. Okay, and you know those different parts from the beginning of the year when we went through the different cell units. All right, now taking a look at the geological evidence that helps support the idea of evolution. Okay, basically this geology is defined as the study of the earth and the rocks. Okay, I think most of you probably understand that and know that. And what early ideas about Earth were before the evidence that they have now was that Earth is only a few thousand years old. Now, if you think about where that came from, okay, well, if you know anything about history and basically about the Bible and the story of Genesis, that's where the idea of Earth, being a few thousand years old. Okay, and they believe that it was shaped by these catastrophic events and really changed. That's what scientists believed and people believed beforehand. Okay, that it only changed during catastrophic events, and it happened very rarely. Which now we know it's not quite like that. That it does change over time, and there's some gradual change, and then there's also periods of very quick change. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as we get through this. Okay, so in the 18th century and 19th century, scientists studied geology in great detail, and what they have here is over millions of years, one original continent, Pangaea, drifted apart to make our modern continents. Okay, this is what we call continental drift, and this is due to the idea of gradualism. Okay, so at one time, all the continents were linked together, and that was called Pangaea. All right, and then over a long period of time, there's this process called gradualism that the continents have actually moved apart. And I'm going to show you that here in this next little demonstration. So here you can see the continents just at one time they were all together, and now they have moved apart. And you can see how they kind of perfectly fit together. And this again is called Pangaea, and it's due to the continental drift through the process of gradualism. All right, so a little bit more about geology. All right, so there's Hutton and Lyell. We've talked about Lyell before, and they both kind of agree with the same idea that Earth is changed by weather and natural processes like volcanoes and erosions. So again, there's different events or what you would call it, I guess, what climate changes that would cause the Earth to change in different ways. It could be new mountain ranges forms, it could be rivers forms, climate change, whatever it is. Okay, and they both predict that this takes a very long time for this process to happen, for this change to occur due to the different changes in the weather or climates. Okay, here I just have a picture of obviously the Grand Canyon, and this has happened over a long period of time. This isn't something that happened overnight, and this fits along with Hutton and Lyell's conclusion, what they have drawn through the process of erosion and happening over a long period of time. All right, a few more ideas about geology here. That these ideas refute the idea that the Earth is only a few thousand years old. Okay, because of what Lyell and Hutton has said. For the Grand Canyon and other land formations to form, this will take more than thousands of years. Okay, we're talking millions and billions of years. Okay. And backed by radiometric dating, which is what we call radioactive dating, looking at some of the radioactive elements within molecules that have gone from being radioactive to being non-radioactive, scientists have predicted Earth to be about 4.6 billion years old. Okay, a little bit older than what was originally believed by people. All right, the next set of evidence that we're going to be looking at are the fossil records. And everyone's familiar with fossils and looked at fossils and all that, but Now let's take just take a little bit more look at how they're formed and what evidence they provide for us. So fossils are the preserved remains of ancient organisms. Okay, they provide information about past organisms, meaning structurally, maybe how they reproduce, what types of foods they were eating, all that kind of stuff. And it shows that many diverse organisms lived in different times throughout Earth's history. So it shows us basically a timeline of the type of organisms that were here in the beginning to where obviously where we're at now, how they've changed over time due to different factors. Okay, here you can kind of see 3 different fossils. You can see the different shapes, okay, obviously the different structures that they look like. Some of the oldest structures here. This is our closest link to us as humans, as being Homo sapiens, is the structure called Lucy. And then these are some of the oldest fossils that we have found on Earth. All right, so what do fossil records tell us? Okay, what information do they give us? Basically, a little list here, what past life looked like, okay, meaning from hundreds of years ago to thousands to million years ago. What past habits were like and changes that have occurred. Okay, what are their habitats, where they lived, what have changed over time. The diverse organisms lived on Earth at different times. So, again, the diversity is great, and we looked at that before. And if you look at the early remains of fossils to the remains, some of the more recent ones, you can just see the great change that have occurred. We noticed that over time, because of the fossil records, that new species evolved, and that's just they have diverged so far away from the original species that they are now considered different species. Some species become extinct. Pretty good idea. You think about dinosaurs, right? We know that they're extinct. We don't see them running around any longer. The earliest life forms were aquatic, okay, because the earliest fossils that we have found were in areas where there was water at one time, okay, in the beginning. And then earliest life forms were simple in structure, very simple, prokaryotic, very primitive type organisms, because they couldn't be very complicated at that time. All right, so again, a little bit more about the fossil record, but now what we're looking at is how are fossils formed. Fossils form is what they call sedimentary rock. Okay, so we're talking about sand and silt. These organisms, what they do is they'll eventually die. The organisms die. The sediments are passed into or put onto these fossils, and then what happens is as the sediment builds on top of each other, the pressure of them will actually make the minerals from the sediment go into the bone structure and actually replaces the calcium. So really your fossils are basically rocks instead of being bone structure that you might see. Okay, so what we're going to do here is kind of a quick little look at a video on how these fossils are made.
It takes a rare set of circumstances to turn a living creature into fossilized bone. In the case of Lucy, the famous hominid fossil, discovered in Ethiopia's Great Rift Valley in 1974, there is no evidence that she met a violent death. No predator or scavenger found her body before it began rotting in the lake's soft sediments. Her bones, which settled in the mud, may have been cracked or shattered by animals roaming around the shore. Heavy rains gradually washed in enough sand and gravel to bury her bones. These deposits built up over thousands of years, burying her remains hundreds of feet deep. The calcium in her bones, molecule by molecule, was replaced by minerals from these deposits, ultimately turning the bones to stone. She remained buried over millions of years, while the Earth's crust moved constantly, forcing the remains of her body closer to the surface. Heavy storms beating down on the Earth eroded the sediment, and most likely brought her once again to the Earth's surface. Her exposure made it possible for anthropologists to later discover her remains some 3 million years after her death.
All right, so as you can see there, that's kind of went through the idea and the process of fossilization. Before I move on to this particular side, I do have a few different fossils that I brought with, or that I have to show you here. You can on this particular fossil, you can see the different remains of different shells. Okay, I have a couple other ones here. Another one. I'll show you these in class so you get a better idea of what they look like. But you can see there's some fossils on here. We have another fossil here. Okay, just some differences. I think a lot of you have seen fossils, but I'll have these in class so you can kind of see these and what they look like. Okay, and you can feel and touch and kind of take a look at those. And these are just some some more fossils that we have here in school that maybe we can take a quick look at. Okay, so moving from the process to the idea of trying to figure out how old these fossils are. There's two different ways. There's relative dating and radiometric or radioactive dating. The first one to look at is relative dating. And what happens here, the age of the fossils are relative to fossils in other layers of rocks. So what they do is they use, there's known how old the different layers of the rocks are, okay? And what they do is wherever they're placed within that layer, the geological time scale will tell them roughly how old they are. Okay, so there's different layers, different periods of the geological time periods. The older fossils are found on the bottom layers. But the only problem with this is, the only drawback is that you can't have an actual age. You know, you can get it in a certain time period, but you're never going to get the actual age of the particular fossil. Okay? So you can kind of see here a couple different diagrams of that. Back up real quick. So you can see that what we're looking at here, you can see the youngest layers on top, your oldest layers on the bottom, all right? And then you can see the different layers, and I also have here, you can kind of see some of the different types of shells that were found. You know, we actually had a couple of these shells that I had showed you in the different time periods, but your newer organisms will be on top, your older organisms will be on bottom, and that's just the way the land kind of fills on top of each other. So as you increase depth, so the deeper you go, the older the fossils are going to be. All right, second type of dating is radioactive dating, or also referred to as radiometric dating. And this is a process by which traces of radioactive elements are analyzed. Okay, so in everything, there's a trace amount or more than a trace amount of radioactive material in it. Okay, so you know, in the bricks in the building, the bricks in the house, or whatever it is, there's a slight radioactive material in it. And what the scientists can do is they can actually backtrack, okay, and follow it back and analyze it and figure out how much, because they know how long it takes for radioactive material to become non-radioactive material, become stable. And what they can do is kind of do a reverse process and figure out the actual age of that particular fossil. Okay, so relative dating cannot give us actual age. They just use the geological time scale for a reference, whereas radioactive dating or radiometric dating will get you the actual age of that particular fossil, you know, almost to the year. Okay. All right, so a little bit more about the geological time scale. I've mentioned this a few times now. It's based on fossil and geological evidence. This is what they use to base how old the different layers are. It's basically a record of the Earth's past. All right, so we can track back all the way to the beginning of the different layers. You know, maybe when some mass extinctions were. You know, in class we watched some videos that talk about mass extinction. You also see the scientists, you know, walking up the different layers. Okay, traveling up thousands of years by way going through this. It's divided into eras, periods, and epochs, and it shows life on Earth followed geological change on Earth. So as the change geologically happened, the organisms on Earth had to adapt to the changing environment that they lived in. So that kind of drive what organisms were succeeding and what organisms were not succeeding. So this kind of just shows you what the geological time scale looks like. Okay, you can see here we have the eras, the periods, and the epochs, and you kind of see what happens, what major events happens within this time period. This is the most recent up here at 0, and this gets us all the way down to where you see the 4.6 billion years old. Okay, so you can see there wasn't a whole life that occurred here. Okay, very small-shelled animals, and then as we got going up through here, you can go and see the Ice Age ends, and you can go through this and you kind of see when the different organisms were present at the time, and the first reptiles, the first fish, how long ago this all occurred. But again, this was basically what was land formations were present, what was the driving some of the organisms that could succeed at that time period. Okay, so you can see here, we're up here in the Cenozoic time period, what we're talking about, so where we're living at now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is kind of show you a quick little video here that's going to talk about this geological time scale.
Eras, periods, and epochs are shown on a geologic timescale that begins with the formation of the Earth 4.6 billion years ago. Eras and periods are defined by geological events, such as layering of rocks or when chemicals, such as oxygen, appeared. There have been 4 different occurrences of mass extinctions since Earth first formed. The Precambrian era began with the formation of Earth. The oldest prokaryotic and eukaryotic fossils came from this time. It is when multicellular and soft-bodied organisms appeared and invertebrates and algae diversified. The Paleozoic era has 6 distinct periods, and mass extinctions occurred during 2 of them. Land plants, insects, and vertebrate animals first appeared, but corals and other invertebrates dominated. Forests of ferns and gymnosperms were common. The Mesozoic era is characterized by the appearance of the dinosaurs. The first mammals, birds, and flowering plants appear during this time period as well. The Cenozoic era is characterized by an increasing number of plant and animal species. Monkeys, apes, hominins, and finally humans appear.
Alright, so welcome back, and now we'll go back to our PowerPoint here and kind of start wrapping up, getting into the last couple concepts here. The next one is comparative embryology, and what we're going to do, embryos are organisms at early stages of development. We're just going to kind of look at, you can see the very similar structures here from the beginning of the development, and eventually you can see how they basically diverge from each other. But initially you can look at the embryos, and you can see the early stages are very similar to each other. Okay, and you can see also the development of the different parts are also very similar. Okay, the bone structures, they kind of color coordinate those, showing you what bones are considered to be the same bones in other organisms. Okay, so that's comparative embryology, just looking at it across the board, what they look like. And then basically a little bit more about that is you can see all vertebrate embryos, including humans. Okay, so we all share a few features. We all have eye spots, we all have gill pouches, and we all have a nodal cord, which means we have a spinal cord. Okay, so that's looking at all vertebrate embryos across the board. Okay, so that means we all have very similar genetic ancestry because of us sharing these 3 main parts. Okay, just another picture showing you some of the different organisms that have very similar structures. You can see initially up here at the embryo stage, very similar, and then it starts diversifying away from each other. But some of them are very close in the structure and what they look like. All right, the next one is comparative biochemistry. And what we're looking at is we have 4 key points, and then we have some points branching off of those. All right, so let's kind of go around here. It says all life is based on organic chemistry. We've talked about it a number of times when we went into a little bit about biochem. This just means that all life is carbon-based. Okay, they all have similar chemical processes, meaning like bacteria, algae, and plants all do photosynthesis, so they're all linked in that chemical process that's occurring. All life uses the same molecule as a blueprint. Okay, all living things, no matter what they are, okay, have DNA in them. That's the same code, A's, G's, T's, and C's. Now, the order of it, the length of it, that's all different, but we do all speak the same language when we're talking about the genes. And the last one here, similar organisms have similar genetic code, humans and chimpanzees share nearly about 98.5% the same gene sequence. Now that doesn't tell us we're direct descendants of them, right? But it does say that a lot of organisms share, okay, a lot amount of the genes and the DNA sequences that occurs, okay? So that's biochemistry. Now looking a little bit about anatomy and comparative anatomy. There's something what we call vestigial organs. Okay? These are organs inherited but not used by modern organisms. They're present, but they're greatly reduced. So either we don't use them, okay, or they're there and they're not used at all, okay, and they're greatly reduced in size. So for instance, I'll give you 3 points here. The python, okay, they have a hip bone. Humans, we have appendix, but we don't use it. And we also have a tailbone, and obviously it's not used for any reason to hold a tail or anything, okay? So those are examples of what we call vestigial organs that are inherited but not used, or they're greatly not present, or if they are present, they're greatly reduced in size. Okay, just kind of showing you the difference here. These are all similar organisms, or sorry, different organisms, but they all share some of the very common type of bone structure. Okay, you can see the difference here through the boa constrictor, the whale hair, and then also salamander, all sharing this type of bone. So a very similar structure, but obviously, the salamander uses a lot more than the snake does. Okay, then we have 2 different concepts here that goes along with the structure of the anatomy. Is called homologous structures and analogous structures. Okay, so homologous structures, and we know what the prefix homo means the same. So what happens here is there's similar parts of different organisms, often quite dissimilar in purpose, that develop from the same ancestor body part. Okay, so we're talking it's the similar parts, okay, but they're used for different purposes. Okay, so as you can see here, it's what we call divergent evolution. Similar parts from the same ancestry, but they're used for great big differences, or they don't use it for the same purpose. I'll show you a picture in a second. The second one here is analogous structures. They're similar in purpose, but not inherited from the recent common ancestor. So it's the exact opposite of what homologous structures is. Okay. Basically, an example here is the environment selected for a trait like wings of birds and insects. They're not from the same ancestry, but evolutionarily they're coming together and converging because of the use of it. So to show you a picture of that, all right. So up here you can kind of see we have here up there. They're from a similar ancestry, but they're used for great differences. Bat for flying, mouse for more running in the human arm. So we come from a closer ancestry, but we're diverging apart. Whereas what we see here, okay, these organisms are from very different, okay, ancestry, but they're being used for the same part, almost basically for the same reason. Okay, so that's homologous and analogous structures. Okay, so a quick little summary here, kind of wrap up the screencast. There's overwhelming evidence to support the theory of evolution. Remember, the idea of theory in science is very different than the theory out of science. Evidence comes from the disciplines as varied as biology, geology, chemistry, physics, anatomy, paleontology. We looked at all the different comparative and embryology, all those different areas to help support the idea of evolution. Evolution has produced a great beauty and diversity of life on Earth over the last 4 billion years. Okay, so these organisms are evolving, changing with as geology changes, the geological influence changes. So the organisms and the ones better adapted for their environment becomes more fit, and they'll be able to reproduce and spread their genes and pass their genes down to their offspring. So this was a screencast session number 3 for evolution, giving you evidence for evolution.